Now, I'm watching the 60-minute chart very closely because, again, here we are filling another gap. Do we end up going down and getting a larger Fibonacci retracement? The 61-point fib, we never did quite reach it. We still may. Gap support is just underneath it, but that's 61.8 fib is at 59.09. The 78.6 Fibonacci is at 58.49, and that's near our CPI gap fill at 58.43. So just some levels that I'm looking at. Should we end up getting a bigger sell-off? We don't have to move to a new low, and we may not. We've already back tested. That's what I was looking for. That's what I told you would happen. But it's still possible we end up testing the trend line again and tagging our 61.8 Fibonacci moving slightly lower than this level. That is certainly possible. I don't know that we filled the CPI gap or hit our 78.6 Fibonacci, but we very well could have hit the 61.8 fib and hit this trend line again and get a slightly lower low. We'll be watching. If we get rejection here at our gap fill at 6,040, we reached it yesterday and then pulled down, turned down off of it. We gapped down today and then turned back up and closed solidly back above it, very similar to what the Bitcoin ETF did, and it was followed by a sell-off. So again, I'll talk about the relationship as between Bitcoin and S&P as we see the S&P continue to follow Bitcoin's lead. So it's likely going to get a sell-off. That's what Bitcoin did when it filled the gap. So the Bitcoin ETF. We'll be watching. Please support the channel with the link directly below that allows me to be able to provide you this information. If you follow the link, it'll take you to a secured site. You can donate any amount you want or make it a recurring donation. If you do that, I thank you. But if you could take a moment and do that, I would really, really appreciate it. You know, most channels on YouTube, they have sponsors and they contact me all the time, but I turn those offers down because I don't want to sell you anything. There's so many shady deals, like a lot of these gold companies, you know, they want you to go to their sites, but hey, we're going to charge you a triple commission. There's just so many shady deals out there, so I just don't want any part of it. But if you could take a moment to partner with me, I just put it all out there. I'll show you the charts that I look at every single day. Find that helpful? Please take a moment to support the channel. Let me know you want this information, you like this information. It takes a long time to do this. A lot of work involved in doing this and making the video and processing it and getting it all done. Let me know you want this information. I need to hear from you. I thank you for your consideration for that. We have the S&P 500, again, rallying back up to this gap fill area. We gapped down. We had the gap fill at 6,038. The previous gap fill was at 6,040. So again, we filled today's gap. We gapped down. We went back up. We filled the gap, and now here we are closing solidly above the gap, the previous gap from the tariffs at 6,040. So in black is today's gap. The red is the tariff gap. This gap up here is the DeepSeek gap. I told you, again, after I predicted the bottom of the rally, I told you we were going to get a pullback. Okay? We broke out, nailed it. Everything happened, but I told you we were going to get a pullback. We got it. And I think this is an ABC move. And again, the C might still be under construction. It may have finished over here, but again, it might still be under construction. We try to go hit our 61.8 Fibonacci or maybe fill the CPI gap fill and reach our 78.6 Fibonacci at 58.49, pardon me. So again, do we end up seeing the RSI come back down and get a confirmation of a higher low and then go on our way and this ABC's done over here, or do we get a pullback and go slightly lower low and then go on our way, regardless of, or maybe something deeper, regardless of how it unfolds? I think you're going to end up getting a higher low and end up taking out the high over here and resuming the advance. So that's what I think is likely going to be the case. There might be more work to be done in here. We have this divergence giving us this bottom. There might be more work to be done. You know, at our bottom over here, there was multiple divergences involved, multiple points of divergence here on the RSI. Do we see something similar to that again here that finally gave us this bottom? We'll be watching that. If we do go a little bit lower, you have the trend line. We bounced off the trend line. Remember, I told you why I was predicting a bottom is because we had that trend line from the 2023 low and the gap fill from the election over here, the election gap fill at 57.83. That was the election rally. Remember, we had that bullish divergence predicted we were going to get that rally ahead of the election. Well, we filled that gap. We hit the trend line. Do we come back and hit it again? Could be. Which could take us back down to hit our upper boundary of the rising, the upper boundary of the bull flag, I should say, and maybe go slightly lower. But do we get rejection off the 10 and then end up coming back down and hitting this trend line yet again and then bottoming out and moving just slightly lower than this level and hitting our 100 period moving average and then getting the rally? Up. But again, eventually I think we're headed to this upper boundary right here. We're forming this massive rising wedge here. And this rising wedge is forming in a larger channel in the weekly time frame. But this is where I think we're eventually headed. And again, I think that's going to take us up to new highs, but then I think we're going to top and begin to price in a recession. But I remain bullish in that I believe that we are going to continue these subwaves and that we're in this minor wave 5. Again, everybody was saying, oh, we got a head and shoulders. And again, the people that told us that the December sell-off wouldn't happen, they got very bearish down here. And I told you that we were bouncing off a major trend line of support. The herd then finally got bearish. And so again, that was the bottom. And again, I told you I was predicting a bottom the following week is because they started getting very, very bearish. I thought it was a wave 4. And now I think we're in minor wave 5. And I think this whole thing is intermediate wave 5. And I think once it's done, I think the bottom is going to fall out of the stock market. I think this rally will end up here at this trend line, but then I think we'll get a 20% sell-off. But the S&P up another 20, almost 24 points today, up 0.39%. So is the bottom here, or do we go back and tag the trend line, tag the 100 period moving average, and get one more push lower, and get rejection off our 10 period moving average we'll be watching? Or is a bottom in and we flip momentum all back to bullish on the S&P 500 would be a positive sign. And again, here is the longer term trend line. You can see it going all the way back to the 2023 low, and that's why I predicted that we would get that bottom right there. Predicted that on January 9th and 10th. We got it on the 13th, that following Monday. We bottomed the week I told you. We got the rally, and now we're pulling back as I told you. Everything's happened. Signals have nailed it, but now, again, do we get one more push down and hit this trend line and then go, or was that it? Do we have a bottom in and we maybe pull back at a higher low, or see signals begin to turn back to bullish? Going to get some kind of pullback for a higher low or a lower low, but then I think we're going to bottom and move up into this area. That rising wedge on the weekly chart is right here in black. And again, this is where I think we're headed. I think we're headed up into this area here. Hit the upper boundary of this channel. I think we buy a little bit more time. I think we are going to end up moving to new highs. I thought that Inauguration Day was a continuation of the election rally from November. I think that's being proven correct. We're getting the pullback that I told you we'd be getting, but I think we're going to go to this level. And then I think we're going to see an immediate 20% drop over the next 1 to 3 months after we see that peak. And that's when I think we're going to get the Fed freaking out. And the market will begin to price in a recession. We'll have an inflation freak out in all likelihood. Why do I keep saying that? Because, again, the tariffs, the market believes that they cause inflation. They do not. If you pay more for something with the tariff, that increase is offset by reduced spending someplace else. That's why I told you the tariffs, they act as a tax. If you buy something with a tariff on it, you have less money to buy something else. That's why there's a neutral outcome with tariffs, because the increased spending for something with a tariff results in reduced spending with something else that you would have bought. Maybe you don't buy as much of that item. I think there's still going to be an inflation scare, but again, I'm not a fan of the tariffs. I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that they cause inflation just because I don't like them when they don't cause inflation. So again, this is where I think we're headed. I think we're going to bottom out either here you have, or again, maybe you hit this trend line one more time. Right here is the trend line from the 2023 low. Told you we hit it. We filled that gap from the election. Maybe we hit it again this week, and then that creates a bottom. I think there's a good shot that that could be the case if we get a rejection at the 10-period moving average on the S&P. I continue to be fascinated by the similarities between Bitcoin and the S&P 500. Again, the Bitcoin ETF almost a carbon copy of the S&P 500. This is a 60-minute chart, and again, they both bottomed on the 13th. We had the run-up and the breakout of the bull flag for both. S&P went slightly higher, so did Bitcoin. The Bitcoin ETF made a slightly lower high. It's not perfect correlation, but there are very similar things taking place. We saw the breakdown, we saw the sell-off surrounding the DeepSeek sell-off here. And again, we went back, we filled the DeepSeek gap, formed a bear flag. S&P did the exact same thing. We saw the Bitcoin ETF begin to turn down. And then we got another gap lower on Monday with the tariff sell-off. The S&P did the same thing. And what's interesting is right now the S&P has been kind of following Bitcoin's lead. It's very interesting. Bitcoin ETF went back and filled the gap immediately. We filled it yesterday on the S&P 500 and then went a little bit higher. Here we overthrew this area. We closed pretty much just right at it and then turned about 2 points below it and closed on the S&P. The gap filled from the tariff sell-off and went above it today. So I'm watching, is this going to be, this relationship going to continue? Is this going to be the next thing for the S&P, is to go back towards the lows there from the tariff sell-off? I'm watching, same thing here. I'm watching to see, does this low hold on the Bitcoin ETF? Do we come back down, make a new low, fill this gap, and hit this trend line maybe one more time? Or is that it and we establish a higher low? Looking for clues at the Amazon earnings to the bell on Thursday. We get the jobs report on Friday. So more things for the market to digest. We still have tensions with tariffs regarding United States and China. Just something we're paying attention to. This is something I'm watching. I'm looking to see, again, same thing for the S&P. Does it get a higher low and go on our way and we see everything turn back to bullish? Or do we get a lower low? You know, the other thing about Bitcoin itself is when we rose to fill this gap right here on IBIT, Bitcoin hit the 10-period moving average. That's what the S&P is doing right now, filling this gap. So it's really kind of following Bitcoin's lead. I'll be watching to see if that relationship continues. If it does, we should see a pushback down on the S&P 500 because this is what the Bitcoin ETF already did, and Bitcoin rose and turned off the 10-period moving average. It's the bounce that we're getting on the S&P 500. The VIX did predict this would happen. There with Monday's low, it predicted in the next two sessions we'd either get a bounce or a bottom. So it's one or the other. But look at Bitcoin. Again, had this rally back up, stalled at that 10-period moving average as a 10 was crossing the 20 there. S&P is testing the 10 right now. So it's very, very interesting, especially since we're getting the MicroStrategy earnings, which has huge exposure to Bitcoin in after hours. I'm watching this low right here that got a higher low above the low over here from the January low. Again, predicted the pullback, but I'm looking for a higher low, and we may test this low again or slightly take it out. But again, looking for either a higher low to set up or a lower low, same thing as I'm looking at on the S&P 500. But the relationship is very interesting. And right now, Bitcoin pulling back off of that 10-period moving average and the S&P 500 and tagging that 10 and 20 there, and then reversing off of the 10 without being able to close above it. The S&P is right at that 10-period moving average. And here it is. S&P closed just above it. Bitcoin tried to get above it, and then it didn't close above it. So again, we're going to be watching. Do we get rejection surrounding this 10-period moving average? We came back. We filled the gap ever so slightly yesterday, and then now we're closing above this level. So again, do we get a test? I think it's likely we test this low, and if we do, again, we still can hit our 100-period moving average. I think that we're going to hold above the January low on S&P 500. But do we come back and still end up getting a bigger retracement, a Fibonacci retracement? Do we come back and maybe our 61-point Fibonacci was right at that level? Just some things I'm paying attention to here on the S&P 500. But we are testing that 10-period. Now, if the rally can continue, there's possible momentum changes back up, and maybe that's it. But even if we pull back, we still may not take out this low. I told you, again, back up at the top, we're going to get a sell-off. Oh, and back test the breakout of the bull flag. That's now happened. Again, possible it's not done and we get a bigger Fibonacci retracement if that low is taken out, but Sell-off that I warned you about, just like the bottom and the rally that I warned you about over here, and the sell-off back over here. Amazing signals. And right before the election rally, the signals on the 60-minute chart warned us to these things before they happened. Absolutely amazing job with that 60-minute chart. It gives incredible signals. I love the 60-minute chart. Again, I'll be watching to see if we get rejection here at the 10 period. If that positive correlation with Bitcoin continues, again, we seem to be following Bitcoin's lead just right behind it. S&P daily chart right here. Now that flipped. The rally today flipped the awesome oscillator bar to green. Still possible that we get more volatility here. We're still on a bearish momentum signal here. We're still seeing the bearish reversal of conditions. And again, oftentimes you'll get rejection at the 10 period moving average. The 20 is down here, still below that 50. And I told you, I think we're going to end up seeing that 20 get back above the 50. We may pull back, and that's why I told you we might get a higher low than this low from Monday, or we might get a lower low. Now, why would we get a lower low? Because we might get a deeper Fibonacci retracement. Do we have to? No. The sell-off that I warned you about has now happened. Again, the question now, is it done with this low, or we get a slightly deeper pullback, or do we get a higher low? If we flip the cloud to bullish, that's going to be a bullish signal. Yes, is we're going to come back and test this low. Likelihood for a higher low or a lower low. If we get the lower low and we fill the gap over here, I told you to be watching at 59.38. That was a gap fill from the breakout over here, right there, and of the breakout of the bull flag right before the election of the inauguration day. And I told you we were going to get that rally back on the 9th and 10th. I told you we'd be bottoming the following week. We bottomed the very next day on Monday the 13th at the trend line of support and filling the gap over here from the election rally with the rally with the election there. Predicted the bottom, predicted the rally, and then told you we were going to get a pullback. We've now had it. So is it done? I'm looking for clues just like you. But if we flip the cloud back to green, then pretty good chance that maybe this is done. But like I said, over here, again, told you at this low with the deep seek sell-off, I told you, again, everybody, when we rally back up to fill the gap with deep seek, everybody's saying, oh, it's over, it's over, it's over. And I told you, again, we formed a bear flag. And again, I told you, I stuck to my guns. I told you I didn't think it was over, and it wasn't. I was correct. I told you I thought we'd take out that low and still back test. We didn't quite reach it right there. We did over here, but we filled the gap. Now we're filling the gap with the tariffs sell-off. So we filled the deep seek gap over here. Now we're filling the gap with the deep seek. The tariff sell-off, pardon me. Do we get another push down here and then maybe get a larger Fibonacci retracement? Right here is gap support, and right there is our 61.8 Fibonacci at 59.09. We go deeper into the golden pocket. You got the 78.6 Fibonacci here at 58.49. Right below that is our gap fill from the CPI rally that flipped the cloud back to green right there. So again, just some things to be paying attention to. Again, we very well may have bottomed, but I need to see evidence of that. Signals turning back to bullish, or again, another push down where I think that, again, that would likely be the bottom, because again, we can still volatility. Now, I'll be watching. Does the green quickly turn back to red and we end up getting another sell-off like what we've seen with Bitcoin, surrounding the 10 period moving average, filling the gap, and then hitting the 10 period, getting rejection off of it? That's what Bitcoin did. Or do we, that positive correlation between the two begin to change? But again, I think it's likely the S&P is going to follow what Bitcoin has just done, getting rejection off the 10, filling the gap, and then getting some volatility. So I think that the volatility is probably going to return. But again, like I said, I expect new all-time highs. I believe this is a pullback, and it may not be done yet. I'm looking for a higher low, a test of this low, a higher low or a lower low. If we get the lower low, you want to be watching the gap fill here from the CPI rally. You want to be watching the golden pocket. The Fibonacci retracements with the 61.8 Fibonacci, between the 61.8 Fibonacci and the 78.6 Fibonacci, is called the golden pocket because it's often touched, in retracements. So again, we'll be watching. Do we see that? We didn't quite reach it here with the back test. Do we see that still happen? I'll be watching closely. Yeah, same thing with Nasdaq. We had a rally continue here. We were up 0.42%. We were up 91 points for the Nasdaq, but it's still not flipping the cloud. Momentum is still bearish. We're coming back up and we're filling the gap here, but the momentum has not yet flipped back to bullish. So does it? We'll be watching closely, but if it follows what Bitcoin's doing, and we'll be watching because MicroStrategy is giving earnings here right after hours. We'll be watching how that impacts Bitcoin. But does the market follow Bitcoin's lead still? And again, here's the January low with the Nasdaq, and again here it's kind of interesting. The S&P moved lower, Nasdaq did not. There is a divergence there, so it's something I'm also watching because oftentimes they diverge. Can that flip momentum back, or do we keep that positive correlation with Bitcoin where we get volatility? And if we do get a sell-off with tech, we got the Amazon earnings after hours on Thursday, and then the jobs report on Friday, do we end up going back and filling this gap here on the NASDAQ just below the 20,800 area? And if we end up taking out the January low, you have that gap from the election that we still have never filled. We may do it later, but just some things I'm paying very close attention to here. Again, the NASDAQ's not making new highs from the December high. The S&P did. And again, often diverge at turning points. I don't think the rally's done with the S&P yet. I think after we get established a higher low, I think it's going to go higher. But will the NASDAQ? And again, I'm looking for clues regarding that. And if the rally can continue, we can flip momentum. If we get rejection here, then we'll be watching. Do we take out the 50 and the 20 here on the NASDAQ? And if so, do we go back and try to take out the January low back over here on the 13th? Should we get a bigger sell-off? And then I'll be watching the low right here from the DeepSeek sell-off, which we were just above that level with our Tariff sell-off. So again, just a support level to be paying attention to, just under the 21,000 area. Do we take out the 21,000 area here and start making a move to come back and try to fill this gap here, to test the January low, the January 13th low? Just some things to be paying attention to on the NASDAQ daily chart. NASDAQ's been going sideways, but the momentum here, we still have blue bars, we still have the green cloud here in the weekly time frame. Again, it may end up that it can't make new highs. It still could possibly do it if we end up setting up a divergence right here. We have this larger one that has set up right here, but it could also just confirm a lower high if we end up seeing green bars and we end up seeing the S&P move to new highs, but the NASDAQ not able to do. But something I'm watching here in the weekly time frame here is that we haven't been able to flip the cloud. We've dropped below it, but we didn't stay there, and we still have the blue bars still bouncing off that 20-week moving average. That's the blue line you see right there. NASDAQ weekly chart here. Now here I have the S&P 500 weekly chart, and right now the week is not over yet, but we are getting a green bar. I told you to be watching for this. Even if momentum doesn't flip back to bullish in the daily time frame, say we sell off with the Amazon or with the jobs report, we go back and we test the tariff low from Monday. Again, going to be looking, and that was right at the 20-week moving average, by the way. Going to be looking, did we close with the green bar or not? Did flip with the out of the bull flag. We flipped, as I told you we would, ahead of Inauguration Day. Told you we were going to get that rally and bottom out. We did, and again, we flipped bars back to blue, the cloud back to green, and now we've had this pullback and back to our 20-week moving average. Again, could go a little bit lower, but we could also get a higher low, and this low may hold right here at the 20-week moving average. But I'll be watching. Do we end up closing, if we do pull back off of the 10-period moving average, do we end up closing with the green bar or not this week? And if we don't get it this week, you're probably going to get it next week if we end up getting the bigger pullback. But I do think that once we finish the pullback, the S&P will go higher. We're getting the pullback I predicted. I'm just looking for clues to see if it's done yet, and I don't have enough information about that yet. I told you to be watching for a green bar to eventually show up here. Why? Because I think a divergence is developing, and I think we'll get several green bars. Even if this one goes away, I think one will show up next week if it goes away this week. And I think we'll get this divergence in the more recent price action and go well above this trading range that we're in right now. And I think that will take us to the targets that I've been talking about in the weekly and the daily time frame. So again, that's why I've been watching for this green bar. We're now getting it. Maybe it goes away before the week ends, but I think you're going to get it either this week or next week, completing, that will give us this divergence. And even if we sell off, you still may have a green bar by the end of the week. So we'll be watching. What kind of candlestick do we get in the weekly time frame? And I'll be looking at that by Friday's close. Now, we also have the momentum line, and the bars reflecting momentum. They're still bearish, okay? And could we turn down the 10-period moving average that we looked at earlier as we turn down off of the gap fill with DeepSeek? It's turning back to bearish. So again, could we get a larger retracement? It's certainly possible, or at least test this low. But again, I don't think we're out of the woods yet. The shaded area tells us that a squeeze move could be getting ready to happen. Shaded area is still developing, so it's not done yet. It very well could be, if we begin to get the squeeze up or down, could finish. We'll be watching. Momentum is bearish. We saw that with the reversal of conditions. We see it here with the momentum line. It's red. And again, is it possible we still test our 100-period moving average? We did over here. We just moved just beyond it. Is it possible we test that 100-period, or test this low right here, getting a higher low, or taking this level out and testing our 100-period moving average? We'll be watching closely. See if we get rejection off the 10-period moving average off the S&P, like it did happen that way with Bitcoin. Momentum's bearish. That's got to change if the rally is going to now resume, if we now have a bottom. So far right now, we're rallying back up to the 10-period moving average on the daily and filling the gap from the tariff sell-off. That's what's happening so far. Will momentum shift back to bullish? If it does, that would be positive. If it remains bearish, the door is open to test the low from the tariff low there, the sell-off with the tariffs, or even take it out and hit our 100-period, or maybe, again, come and get a larger Fibonacci retracement, or even could go and attempt to try to fill the CPI gap. That's certainly on the table if we take out our low from the tariff sell-off. Could be more volatility with the tariffs. Again, I haven't heard anything on negotiations. It did get canceled. We had a call that was canceled. Apparently, it looks like it was the White House that canceled the call after the retaliatory tariffs from China. So we're going to be watching. But I think we could still see concerns about inflation right now and later, because Wall Street believes that the tariffs are going to cause massive inflation. When we had inflation the last time around in 2018, inflation went, or when we had the tariffs last time around, inflation went down, not up. So again, Wall Street is misguided, but regardless, they're going to believe it. NASDAQ still has a bearish reversal of conditions, but we are seeing some positive things happen here. Momentum's trying to flip here with the momentum line with today, and we're trying to get this little momentum arrow right here. The momentum here with our oscillator is still negative, and again, we still have a bearish reversal of conditions for the NASDAQ, but we're just seeing an attempt to turn bullish here. Now, again, we've seen this before. We saw it over here, attempted to turn bullish, and it turned right back to bearish. We saw the same thing over here, and again, just going sideways. So this bullishness could just mean we're just going sideways, because you're getting this bullish, going from bullish to bearish, back to bullish signals, back to bearish. And here, again, turn bullish, we went up, turn back to bearish, turn up, and again, just a sideways chop and slop. And again, this could be a huge red flag for the NASDAQ if it cannot make new highs. But we'll be watching. Does this bullish signal get validated with a bullish reversal of conditions? Right now, it is not. We'll be watching to see what happens for the balance of the week. And then with the Amazon earnings and the jobs report and all the rest of it later in the week. And NASDAQ never, ever did move to a new high. And again, here on the 60-minute chart, again, we got a higher low. We did not take out the low from the deep seek sell-off. So again, do we still end up seeing a divergence develop here on the 60-minute chart? If we do, we have this gap fill right here, just below the 2,800 area. And if we end up taking out the January low, we have the gap fill from the election, which we never did fill back over here. So again, we'll be watching. Again, our bullish divergences tipped us off to the January bottom. We didn't form a divergence up here. It diverged with the S&P. We got a lower high on the NASDAQ. S&P got a higher high, and I'm watching to see, do we end up after all said and done, forming a bullish divergence, maybe to fill this gap just under 20,800. Let me just get that number here for you. That's 20,759. If we go back and fill that gap, we'll be watching that. Should we get another push down? Right now, we have a series of lower highs after the formation of our bull flag with our January low. So we'll be watching. Do we get another lower low and take that low out, or do we come back and get a higher low? So far, we have a higher low with the deep seek sell-off right there. A slightly higher low above that low there from the tariff sell-off. So we'll be watching what happens here if the RSI goes back down, or do we flip the momentum back to bullish with bullish reversal of conditions? Again, momentum is trying to flip momentum line on the NASDAQ, but it's still bearish on the S&P. You'll see that in this video. NASDAQ up 91 points, up 0.42%, filling the gap just above the 10-period moving average. Again, does it come back down? We have this trend line right here from the August low to our January low that if we come back and test it, we may, again, still see the deep seek low hold. If we take it out, we have the gap again from the CPI, just under 20,800 there, 20,700 range. If you lose that area, the 20,227 area from the election gap. And again, our 200 period is just below that. I don't know that we go that low, but again, if NASDAQ ends up selling off because it ends up diverging with the S&P 500, we see divergence with the tech sector, then it very well may be that it can't make new highs, comes back down in here and then comes back up or whatever, and it just stops making new highs. Very possible. I've drawn this channel, though, if we do make new highs, and a trend line I'll be watching here from the high there in December. We have not been able to exceed the December high. The S&P already has. Looking for clues. Has NASDAQ topped? And then I'll be watching the MACD here. The MACD turned back into positive territory, but we haven't been able to make new highs. Does it end up rolling over and go into negative territory, validating some lower highs here? Or can we remain in positive territory? We start flipping momentum and start being able to clear the resistance zone, the peaks that we previously made, and try to resume the advance. We'll be watching to see how this unfolds. I am not certain that NASDAQ's going to make new highs. And again, I think S&P will. I don't think the Russell will. I think the Russell's peaked, but I am uncertain about the NASDAQ. So I just want to be clear about that. And I'm looking for clues just like you.